we haven't seen either of the two Jims, but I've seen Matthew in the building.
Jim Wells, I think, is at an APG. He'll be with us shortly.
Okay. Members, any and sort of Pat's vote's been delegated to Matthew, but it's not here. Okay. Any members of declaration of interest of financial or other interest committee is applicable? Nope. Yep. Chairperson's business. First up, the new permanent secretary. The department have advised that Neil Gibson from EY, ex-EY I would imagine by that stage, is to be the new permanent secretary of the Department of Finance. Colin Boyle will become the permanent secretary at Communities. A further appointment is under consideration for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. No dates have been provided for any of these appointments. I just want to say, I think it would be appropriate for the committee to write to the department offering thanks and congratulations to the outgoing interim permanent secretary. And I think I would probably like, if while we have the opportunity, maybe myself and the deputy chairperson, the opportunity to talk to the new incoming permanent secretary before we're prorogued, if we were content on that. Good, thank you. And also maybe a note of interest that David Sterling, who was the ex-head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service and who's been in front of our committee once or twice, I just want to congratulate him on his new appointment as the chair of Northern Ireland Screen for the princely salary of, I think it was about 10 grand a year as well. Just demonstrates some things just never really change. Okay, moving on to the next item, chairperson's business. The budget debate, the 22-25 budget debate. The committee commissioned other statutory committees to scrutinise the impact of the draft 22-25 budget on their departments. Their responses have started to appear and will be considered at the committee meeting on the 23rd of February. The committee will be asked at that time to publish a compilation report setting out all the information from other committees. In order to allow all members enough time to review this information, it is suggested that we ask the Business Committee to defer our committee motion on the 22-25 budget, which the committee agreed last week, to Monday the 7th of March. Although the consultation process is paused, it is expected that the Minister will answer the debate. I think, bearing in mind what happened during the last interregnum here when the Assembly was down for 3 years, and I remember having numerous conversations with the then Secretaries of State about budgetary process and monies that were coming through, and it was based on what had been perceived to be what the intent was, whether it was actually there or not. And I think one of the most important things is that we have this opportunity to have this motion debated. At least we'll be able to say, all the departments and all the sort of various areas of the Assembly will be able to say, we were either content or unhappy with that, or there should be more money on that to do that as well. So at least if we don't come back, we're in a situation where we can't be said that we don't have those details to be able to go forward on. I say you all. Keith, do you want to say something?
No, I'm content with that.
Okay. Alicia? Okay. Thank you. Great. An informal meeting. Deputy Chairperson and I met informally with the Minister in respect of the oral statement on Tuesday. Is the committee content to note this? Agreed. Draft minutes of the Finance Committee are at page 6. Members content that the draft minutes are an accurate record of the proceedings. Is this agreed? Agreed. Yep. There are no matters arising. Is this agreed? Yes. Can we have on Starley, Christopher? Are you out there? Yes. Hi, Christopher.
Hello there.
Good.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Committee will now receive an oral briefing from the Assembly Research on the spring supplementary estimates. Christopher is going to do the briefing. The following papers are relevant. The raised briefing paper key points are page 17, and the related correspondence from the committee from DERA and from the Committee for Economy and Committee for Justice are at page 27, and at page 3 of the tabled items. Chris, welcome to the Committee for Finance. Can you give me your oral briefing on your paper and the vote on account? Please. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to talk through this paper on the spring supplementary estimates 2021-22 and the vote on account 22-23. So the aim of this briefing paper has been to support the committee in its consideration of the supplementary estimates and the vote on account documents which the committee were provided with earlier this month.
Did he say they were going to be on the screen?
No.
No. Sorry, I apologize.
Page 17. Do you just want to find the thing on the briefing note? Page 17 onwards on the papers, Militia. Just let me know if you got it.
I picked him up wrong there. I thought he said it was going to be on the screen. I don't know where it was at. Yeah.
Happy?
Yeah.
Okay. Cheers. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so section 1 of this paper provides a quick bit of context and background to the estimates. So we've made a note early on in the paper that although the supplementary estimates document itself runs to hundreds of pages, this briefing paper itself isn't intended to be an exhaustive commentary of every department and every table. It's to provide some context around the estimates process and to summarise some of the key points. So early on in this paper, we've made the important point that the budget does not in itself give the departments the authority to spend or commit resources, but to do that it requires Assembly agreement through the estimates process and the Budget Act. So the main estimate will set out the detailed spending plans for the departments for the financial year, and those are written to the budget position. So when that position is adjusted through monitoring rounds, say, then the estimates will be revised to reflect that new position, and that is what is reflected in the supplementary estimates. It's also worth noting, as I'm sure you're aware already, that the figures in the budget and the estimates do not agree or correlate exactly. One of the reasons for that is that the department will use what's called resource accounting when they're formulating the estimates. And the estimates also includes all aspects of expenditure, such as AME or annually managed expenditure. So it'll be the DEL, the departmental expenditure limit figures in the budget and monitoring rounds that we are most familiar with. So in section 2 of the paper, we start firstly by noting some developments from the latest supplementary estimates document, which I believe followed on from recommendations from the committee. So specifically, table 2 in the document details expenditure that rests on sole authority of the Budget Act, and table 3 provides some detail on headroom that's included within the estimates to allow for additional allocations for some departments. So meaning that funding that has yet to be allocated can still be spent and avoid it being returned under the budget exchange scheme. The department also provided this committee with memoranda outlining some of the individual departments' positions, and we've included a couple of scrutiny points on that in this paper. So table 1 within the estimates document shows that there's been an increase in the total net cash requirement of 1.4 billion and 1.61 billion in terms of the net resource requirement, and that's relative to the main estimates provisions. The estimates document and this paper outline then the amount of headroom that's been built into the estimates, which I just mentioned a moment ago, and that totals over £180 million. So the largest of that, the largest contributor to that is the Department for Communities with 124 million of headroom. Then we've got the Department for Infrastructure with 30 million, Health with 22, and then the Department of Finance with 5.5 million. Here again, we've noted a potential scrutiny point around headroom. So in particular, whether the question around whether that headroom requires executive approval, and if so, whether the Department of Finance has received any guidance or advice on how future decision making in that area might be affected with the situation with the executive. Section 3 of the paper then looks at the resource DEL and capital DEL positions of the departments outlined in the supplementary estimates document. So the document shows an increase in resource DEL of 858 million, and that's equivalent to an increase of 18% relative to the main estimates. And it shows a decrease in capital DEL of 23.9 million, so that's equivalent to a fall of over 3%, again relative to the main estimates. And the two bar charts within section 3 illustrate that. So the largest changes in terms of resource DEL are DFE, with 448 million relative to the main estimates. Department of Health with 221, Communities with 147, and then the Department of Justice with a decrease in the other direction of just over 100 million. In terms of capital, Dale, the Department for Communities has increased 17.5 million, and the Department for the Economy has decreased by 34.5 million. And information from the department would suggest that the majority of that is to do with a reduction in financial transactions capital, or FTC. So I think the initial FTC allocation that was for the Greater Belfast development was too high and resulted in a reduced requirement of 9 million, with the additional 21 being transferred to TEO for the Ulster University. And then moving on to section 4 of the paper, this looks at some key points relating to the vote on account. So again, like earlier in the paper, this provides some brief context to the vote on account, noting the fact that the vote on account is a sort of bridging mechanism that allows departments to continue spending in the period between the financial year beginning and the passing of the main estimates again in June. Also, it notes the fact that this amounts to 45% of the authorised limit from the previous year. So essentially, this is to ensure that departmental business can continue before the main estimates again in June. So this is outlined in section 4 at a departmental level in the table. So this shows that the total resource requirement of 11.1 billion and the cash requirement of 9.8 billion in the vote on account. So when we check against these, it shows that this is equivalent to 45% of the totals for the departments outlined in the supplementary estimates. And then we've finished the paper with some concluding remarks, just to summarise all of the above. So if there are any further questions on any of this, then I am happy to take those now. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah, just a quick, maybe a wee small technical question. You see on the figure 1 and figure 2, you refer to main estimates, and I'm looking at DFC, for example, on capital up 17.5. What exact point in time is that main estimate? Are you talking mid-June, or what exact point in time is that?
So the figures in that table are from their comparison of the spring supplementary estimates document, which was released, I think, to the committee earlier this month and published more widely, I think, last week. The main estimates document itself was published, if you bear with me, sorry, I'll tell you the date on it. It just says June 2021, so it's based on a comparison between the supplementary and the main. So from mid-February to June 21.
So it's since June, technically, yeah.
June for the main estimates, yes.
No, fair enough. That's fair enough. That's all I have, Chair. Thanks.
Okay. Any others? Matthew?
No, I don't have any questions, Chair.
Okay. Okay, Christopher, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Have we got Joanne, Barry and Rushing available?
Do not. Do you want to move ahead to the other stuff?
Yeah, I'll do that. Come to the accelerated passage of the budget until we've talked to them. Public service regulations, item number 9 on the agenda. If we're content, team, to move on. Is that agreed? And then we'll come back to the civil service when they're available for us just after past. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Good. Moving on to item number 9 of the agenda, Public Service Pensions Regulation. The Department proposes to make a statutory rule under powers conferred by the Public Service Pension Northern Ireland Act 2014. The relevant papers are at page 529. Just give me a second while I bring that up. Thank you. The rule covers a number of typographical and grammatical errors, changes to legislation relating to certain types of statutory leave entitlement, associated with the recent birth adoption of a child, circumstances when pensionable earnings can be limited to 1/3 for industrial staff, relaxing the time limits for switching between the Alpha scheme and the partnership pension scheme, and removing the requirement to nominate an unmarried partner in order for them to receive a pension. Some of the above will take effect retrospectively from the 1st of April 2014 or the 1st of April 2019. The Department undertook a consultation on the above with the trade unions over Christmas, who reportedly had no objections. The rule mirrors arrangements in the rest of the United Kingdom and maintains the principle of pension parity. The proposed rule is to be subject to negative resolution. Members, any comments? None? Okay. Therefore, if members are content, is the committee content with the policy intention of the proposed rule, and it is therefore content for the department to make this rule? Is this agreed? Agreed. Yep. Next item on the agenda, item number 10, Statutory Rule 2229, Coronavirus Hospitality Regulations. The department has made a further Omicron hospitality rule at page 534. Give me a second while I bring that up. Which will extend COVID support provisions to Northern Ireland Tourist Board certified hotels, licensed bar and restaurant facilities occupied and operated by sports clubs and soft play businesses with a cafe facility. Owing to the short timescales and as agreed by the Executive, there was no SL1. The additional cost appears to be around about 5.5 million. The committee noted related correspondence on the 9th of February 22 and was content with the policy proposal. The department advises that the rule doesn't deviate from this initial proposal. The committee also sought clarity on the treatment of non-certified hotels and all guest houses and B&Bs. A response has not yet been provided. A departmental response on soft play businesses is at page 24 of tabled items. The rule is to be subject to negative resolution assembly procedure and is to be led in breach of the 21-day rule. This rule came into effect on the 9th of February 2022. Any comments? Matthew, go ahead.
I mean, it's obviously supportive of the measure in and of itself. I wonder, we talked in this committee before, and indeed in the other committee that I'm a chair, that I'm vice chair of, promoting myself there, the economy committee, just about some sectors that were impacted by the Omicron. It wasn't as much of a surge as we thought, but it did significantly impact the economy. Thinking of hotels who are covered by this, but also one group is catering suppliers. Actually, there's a significant chunk of businesses who supply catering. You know, they supply bars and restaurants effectively, and that is their that's their sole income, and they will have been sharply affected. Commercial cinemas is another one. So I wonder, is it worth us writing to the finance minister, or both the finance minister and the economy minister, and asking if there's any work ongoing to ensure that any underspend can be allocated to some of those outstanding sectors?
With your indulgence, may I make a retrospective declaration of interest here? There is a constituent of mine who's involved in the potato trade who has been writing to me, and I've encouraged him to get in contact with LPS and the Department of Finance, but they've received correspondence that has come back that basically says it's not the Department of Finance, it's the Department of Economy. I've encouraged him to write to the Department of Economy to get that point. So I think, with your indulgence of the committee, I think it might be worthwhile if we also write to the department. No, obviously, I think we need to get the statutory rule done, but actually we write to the Minister for Economy to ask him specifically on these additional ones.
I would just let others in. I mean, I agree that the finance minister will regularly come back and say it's for ministers to make a bid, and that's a reasonable point. I don't disagree with that. He is right on that, particularly the economy minister, when there's a significant underspend in the economy department. But it's also, and I don't mean this, you know, as a just if there's an underspend there, and we're talking probably in the low millions to help sectors where it can be proven that they were impacted by the Omicron, and I think particularly catering suppliers, also possibly some commercial cinemas. And who will have had an impact around about the Christmas time, you know, December, January, when we know that consumer behaviour was massively negatively impacted, and they will have taken very big hits.
Okay, Gemma.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. And it's just a declaration of interest as well on a constituency issue. A couple of constituents have contacted me about the extension of this. And I contacted the Finance Minister, who actually, again, as you rightly pointed out, said to contact the Economy Minister. But in light of there being no executive, the Finance Minister reckons that the Economy Minister may not actually be able to include the likes of guest houses and that in this payment. So I have the copy of the letter if you want me to send it around to committee members.
yes, please. And I'll send a letter I received and also correspondence from LPS, so that we have it available in our packs to look at.
So then, in the meantime, though, the committee, is it agreed they want to write to both ministers and just ask if there's any...
Any flexibility.
So it's around catering suppliers, potato trade, are there any more?
We've already asked for the guest houses, B&B, and the hotels that's non-certified.
Yeah, they're not certified. Okay. We are content?
10.
Okay. In that case, then, can we move on to the negative resolution for Statute Rule 2229? Members are therefore content. Can we say that the committee has considered Statutory Rule 2229, the Financial Assistance Coronavirus Hospitality Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2022, and subject to the report of the examiner of Statutory Rule, has no objections to this rule? Is this agreed?
Great.
Agreed. Yep. Thank you.
Officials are there now. So.
Excellent. Okay. And if we move back, team, and in our agenda to item number 7, was the oral evidence spring supplementary estimates vote and account Department of Finance. Joanne Barry Rushing, are you there?
We are, Chair.
Good to see you again, Joanne Barry and Rushing. We keep on meeting like this. It's good to see you. Okay. Team, we're now going to receive an oral briefing from the departmental officials on the budget bill, spring supplementary estimates and the vote on account. We've got Joanne Barry and Rushing with us. The clerk's brief is page 37. The departmental response regarding the January monitoring round is at page 41. Budget Bill 2022 and the EFM and the estimates are at page 118. And the departmental response on Barnett... the departmental response on Barnett Consequentials and Sole Authority is at page 9 of tabled items, as is the Minister's statement on in-year spending. Joanne, Barry and Rushing, welcome again to the committee. We've invited you to the meeting to provide members with a further oral briefing on the spring supplementary estimates and the vote on account. Who's speaking to this?
Barry's going to do the opening remarks, Chair.
Over to you, Barry.
Okay, thank you for this further opportunity to brief the committee on the Budget Bill 2022. In the committee's meeting last Wednesday, I provided the committee with background to the spring supplementary estimates and the associated budget bill, and the committee had raised a number of questions which we agreed to provide more information on. The committee will have received a written response to these, but I would just like to talk you through these today.
Yep.
The first question was what Barnett consequentials we have received for the thermal insulation of housing stock. The allocations to the block in the spending review are provided at an English departmental level and not at an individual programme or project level. So therefore, it is not possible to separately identify the exact Barnett consequentials in relation to the individual programmes, such as the thermal insulation of housing stock. The committee also asked for clarification on what remaining HART report actions are continuing to rely on.
Just a second.
Sorry,
there.
yes.
So Barry, I think just to be correct, the minister, when he spoke this week, I might have to check Hansard, but I think he did say that there was a certain amount of money that did come directly as a consequential. Can't remember what the figure was. It was 100 and I'd have to check my notes.
Council tax, yeah, 100 million.
100
million, that's council tax, 150 million for electricity.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Yes. So those were for two other announcements which had been made. Sorry, it's just explain. But you're correct. There have since then been further announcements by UK government which have led to specific Barnett consequentials for the block, which the minister spoke about yesterday.
If I could maybe just jump in there, just to clarify, the way Treasury provides the money, if it's provided in a spending review, it comes across as consequentials on departmental settlements at Whitehall. If it's provided between spending reviews, then at that stage it tends to be at programme level. But as Barry says, for the spending review, we can't actually identify which programmes give rise to the Barnett consequentials.
Okay, so it was just part of the mix. Okay, yep, thanks.
So sorry, the committee then had asked for clarification on the remaining HART report actions which continue to rely on the sole authority of the Budget Act, which are not covered by the Historical Institutional Abuse Northern Ireland Act 2019. So the Executive Office advised that these are implemented related and administrative actions from the HART report, including a memorial, an official apology, a review of the redress scheme, negotiations with the institutions and support services for victim survivors, and together these amount to a total of £990,000 expenditure. In addition to the questions raised in the committee's letter to the department, the committee had also raised the matter of the total resources being authorised by this bill, which we'd just like to clarify. The total amount of resources being authorised by this bill for use by departments and other bodies in 2021-22 is £27,821,869,000. So this includes the use of resources that are authorised in Clause 2 of the bill, that is £24,645,707,000, and the accruing resources that are authorised by Clause 3 of the bill, totalling £3,176,162,000. In addition, Clause 6 of the bill will also authorise use of resources in the 2022-23, and that will be £11,090,573,000. This is a little less than the total amount authorised by the for the previous 2020-21 financial year by the equivalent Budget Act Northern Ireland 2021. That Act authorised a total of £27,954,526,000 of combined resources and accruing resources, which was £132,657,000 more than is being authorised for this year. The difference is primarily due to the unprecedented level of allocations made in the 2020-21 year in response to the height of the COVID pandemic. The expenditure that is being funded through Northern Ireland's share of national insurance contributions are included in these figures, and they appear in the estimates for the Department for Communities and the Department for Health. Last week, a figure of £3 billion was referred to for this. So just to correct the record, it is a lesser figure. It is £656,926,000 for health services and £86,800,000 for communities. I hope that the committee finds these answers helpful, and we are happy to answer any further questions that the committee may have today.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Rather than getting into the detail, but just a couple of points, because I think these are quite germane to what we're doing at the moment. Last week, the Department advised that executive approval was not required for the Budget Number 1 Bill 2022. In the event of an executive not being formed after the election in May and 22-25 budget not being agreed, could the Minister therefore introduce a Budget Number 2 Bill in order to authorise continued expenditure in 22-23, as long as this did not deviate from the predecessor executive spending decisions?
Chair, I suppose if I take that on, I suppose in theory possibly yes, but the problem is that we don't have a budget for 22-23, and the Budget Number 2 Bill is based upon an agreed budget position. So without an executive to agree a budget, it's hard to say what we would base a Budget Number 2 Bill on.
Okay. Sorry, Matthew?
Oh, sorry, Chair, am I coming in now already? Have you finished?
No, I just thought you wanted to come in on that particular one.
Take my turn.
Okay, that's fine. It's not like you. Okay.
That's why you reserved it, Chair. What's wrong, Matthew? What's wrong?
That's just not like you. Right. Okay.
Has such a reputation for it.
The next question is that the Department has previously advised that the vote on account 22-23 is based on the 21-22 budget. The Department has also advised that the new national insurance contribution monies are to be included in the vote on account for 22-23. Can the Department explain how this new money was included in the budget bill, but that didn't require executive agreement? How did that happen?
The new money is not included in the budget bill. The vote on account is purely a percentage of the amount that's been authorised for this year. The National Insurance Fund contributions that Barry was referring to are those which were in existence before the increase. They've been in place for some years, so that is the amount that Barry was referring to. In his comments, the increase in the National Insurance Fund will not be there until we do Budget Number 2 Bill.
So it's the old national insurance contributions, bar consequentials, not the new expected increase?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct.
How much is that?
Go ahead, Sir.
How much is that, the extra coming in from the increased national insurance contributions in April?
Off the top of my head, I think it's around 400 million,
Right.
but I'm not sure that we have a precise figure yet. I'd need to check that.
But am I right in thinking that's hypothecated for health and health alone?
Yeah, the cash has to be spent for health and will be paid directly into the Department for Health's account, which is why it shows as accruing resources.
400 million.
Yes, in the Department for Health. The money is paid directly into the Department for Health's account.
So in the absence of a number 2 bill, where does that 400 sit?
I suppose spending in the initial part of the year will be covered by the voting account. The use of the accruing resources wouldn't be authorised until a budget number 2 bill was passed. Barry can correct me if I'm wrong there.
That's correct. There is no authority in the vote on account itself for departments to retain and use accruing resources. Just without wanting to overcomplicate this matter, as you may recall, that because of the review of financial process and the associated financial reporting bill, we're actually from the 22-23 financial year, we will be moving to a model where departments will not have a cap on accruing resources voted in future. But just in this intervening time between this budget bill and the associated spring supplementary estimates and the next budget bill, which will come with the main estimates, we are in that situation where we won't have actually moved to that new model of voting in the budget bill. So until that time, then the Department for Health wouldn't have the authority to retain that income as an accruing resource in this budget bill.
So just to get this, just so we're at complete clarity in this, this means that the approximately 400 million that was due to come over for health isn't going to be able to spend by health.
Yeah, I think that's possibly, Chair, an oversimplification, because we would be working on the basis that a budget number 2 bill will be agreed at some point during the financial year, at which point it will be authorised. But it's certainly not ideal that it won't be proceeding to the, and I suppose in theory it could proceed to the normal timescale if an executive was formed quickly and agreed a budget quickly. It could still happen, but if it doesn't happen to that normal timescale, we would still be working on the assumption that a budget number 2 bill will be passed at some point during the year, because otherwise there will be even wider issues, because the Department of Finance Permanent Secretary can only authorise up to 95%. So the full amount would not be able to be authorised in any case.
But they can still accrue for the whole 400 million because the 400 million is there. It just won't be authorised because there won't be a budget number 2 bill.
Yes, it starts to get complicated. In theory, if accruing resources are not authorised by a bill, they should be surrendered to the consolidated fund. But from memory, and I don't have the legislation in front of me, it's providing we are certain that a bill will be passed at some point in the year, then the department could retain that funding. But I would need to double check the legislation on that. And so those are issues that we will be considering and are considering at the moment.
Joanne, that's quite an important point. Could you get back to us on that one? Because obviously, if they can accrue for the 400 million over this 22-23, that's one thing. But if we're saying that it can't be accrued without a budget number 2 bill, and quite frankly, none of us know when this place is coming back, does that therefore mean that it goes into the consolidated fund? If we could get some clarity on that, that would be quite useful.
Certainly we can respond, Chair, but I would say that at some point during the year, a budget number 2 bill will have to be passed either by the Assembly or by other means at Westminster, as has happened before. Otherwise, we will have a very, very significant shortfall in the amount of funding that departments can spend, wider than just this one particular issue.
Okay. Okay, so next, Matthew, you're next up.
Thank you. I just had a short question. How have you, in preparing the budget bill, what have you done differently since the demise of the executive, put it that way, or the demise of an executive that's able to take meaningful decisions?
There isn't actually a difference because this bill was drafted, and you will recall this bill was actually sent to the committee before the decision of the First Minister to resign. So actually the bill itself still stands as it is. It was written to the executive's last expenditure plans, which was the outcome of the January monitoring round, and as explained last week, it already included some additional headroom for some departments on the expectation that there would be a possibility for further allocations to be made. I know the Minister spoke about this yesterday, that he is intending to proceed with some additional allocations. So as far as this bill is concerned, actually this bill is proceeding, the way it's proceeding is in no way different as a result of the collapse of the executive. That wouldn't be the same. Wouldn't be true if we were then to bring the budget number 2 bill, because that would, as Joanna's explained, that would be dependent very much on a new executive agreeing a budget in order to have a position to write the bill too. But this bill has been written to the outgoing executive's last agreed expenditure plans.
Presumably because this bill would have been, this bill would have been legislated for. Even if the First Minister hadn't resigned, this bill would have been introduced before the draft 22 to 25 budget was finalised.
Yeah. So, yes, and I must stress again, the vote on account, which covers the 22-23 year, does not in any way reflect the 22-25 budget. It is a vote on account in order to allow services to continue to be delivered. It is purely 45% of the previous year's provision. It does not in any way reflect the outcome of a budget, whether a budget had or had not been agreed.
Okay, that's helpful. And then just on budget number 2, the budget number 2 bill, when would you? So assuming that. This is an unhappy thing to have to do, but assuming that we don't have a functioning executive after May, at what point will you? I'm asking you to make that's a civil servants, but just in the abstract, if we didn't have a functioning executive, at what date does that have to be introduced?
The departments will begin, or it is likely that departments would begin to reach the limit of their cash and resource approval sometime after the 31st of July. Now, if a budget number 2 bill has not been introduced by that point, has not been passed, I should say, by that point, then the Section 59 and Section 7 powers for the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Finance would kick in to allow them to authorise cash and use of resources beyond that up to the 95% limit. So and this is based purely on our experience back in 2017 when we had a similar situation, the departments were beginning to reach the limit of that Section 59 approval in the late autumn of the year. So as our estimation would be that it's likely to be a similar situation this year, but that is purely based on the experience in 2017.
Okay.
Just for clarity, Joanne, could you drop the committee a note of the previous timelines of when this happened in 2017? Because I remember having to sit down with numerous conversations with secretaries of state looking at it, and we kept on saying, when are you going to put the budget number 2 bill? When are you going to take charge of the finances? When's this going to happen? And it kept on being pushed back and back. And I know that the civil service were finding it extraordinarily difficult at the time, because I know there was lots of discussions within the civil service who said, no, we need to get this done and we need to get this done now. Could you send us a quick note about, historically, what was the process during 2017, so we've actually got that understanding? Because I think it would be quite useful for not just ourselves in the committee, but also for all MLAs to understand, hopefully we're not in that situation, but what the potentiality might look like, and sort of, again, the pinch points and the timing we need to get that done.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. We can send you that. Of course, we're in slightly different circumstances this time with the passing of the Westminster legislation and ministers remaining in post, but we can certainly set out what happened previously. That's no problem. Yeah.
And also, because of the Westminster legislation, it might be useful for the committee, if the committee are agreed, just to get an update on what ministers' ability to spend is based on the latest Westminster legislation. Because I must admit, I'm not quite fully up to speed as much as I should be, because, quite frankly, I hoped it wasn't going to be there. But could you just, from the finance perspective of it, and sort of the role of the minister and the accounting officer in those circumstances, if you could be so kind? Are we agreed?
Yeah, we can certainly do that from a finance perspective. I think overall it may be more of a TO issue, but we can certainly pull together something in that.
Thanks. Jim?
Yeah, I just want to take you back to the headroom issue. Just clarify for me, the £181 million headroom that's built in, was that approved by the executive?
Barry, do you want me to answer that one?
Yes, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, the headroom itself was not approved by the executive, but in the January monitoring round, the executive did agree that the in-year position would be kept under control and the finance minister would come back to make further allocations once there was more certainty on the financial position, because we were waiting on Treasury confirming the position for the end of the year. So while the headroom itself was not approved, certainly it was expected that we would come back to make further allocations at a later point in the financial year.
But would the headroom not need to be, as a significant issue, approved by the executive?
If we had allocations agreed by the executive, they would have been factored in rather than headroom being there. I suppose the one, and Barry's probably going to correct me, one item of headroom has been approved by the executive, and that's the 5.5 million for the extension of the Omicron support scheme. So while that is headroom because it's over and above January monitoring, that allocation was approved by the executive. But other than that, the headroom is there was included at that time to allow the executive the ability to make further allocations.
But where is the authority to ask the Assembly to approve that non-approved headroom?
Well, I think, as the Minister set out in his statement yesterday, he's been taking legal advice on these issues and is considering making allocations subject to a write around to other ministers. And I suppose that we are asking the Assembly to approve the headroom in order to allow that capacity, had there been an executive or had there not, for further allocations to have been made post the January monitoring. And the reason for that is simply the timing of it. If we had waited for Treasury to clarify the position at the end of the year, before bringing forward main estimates, we wouldn't simply have had time to do it. So we needed to have headroom built in to preserve that flexibility in order to ensure that funding which can be usefully spent here is spent here and isn't returned to Treasury.
I'm not so interested in the needs must. I'm interested in the legalities of the situation. If we have headroom which has not of itself been approved by the executive, where is the authority then to seek the Assembly's approval of a bill containing that headroom?
Barry wants to jump in there, Barry, do you? Or will I?
The executive at January monitoring, the finance minister explained to the executive and sought the executive's agreement that he would write to his executive colleagues and ask them to come forward for proposals to spend. Therefore, that in itself requires the headroom to be included in the spring supplementary estimates.
It doesn't specify what
it doesn't, and he then, before presenting the spring supplementary estimates and the budget bill to the Assembly, then wrote to his executive colleagues, and this was before the executive collapsed, with a copy of the estimates, including this headroom, to inform him that he was doing so. So while not to preempt if a challenge was taken to that, our advice to the Minister is that he has sought the Executive's agreement to make further allocations, and that we have included in the bill headroom that will allow him to bring forward recommendations for further allocations, but not to confirm those allocations. And he has spoken separately in the Assembly yesterday about how he would intend to proceed with allocations now in the absence of an executive. All this bill does, it just provides the ability of the finance minister and an executive, if an executive were restored, to agree additional allocations.
So the minister wrote to the executive advising them, but he never got to the point of obtaining the executive approval. Is that fair? He
got the executive's agreement to write to other ministers to ask them for any additional expenditure that they may be able to undertake in order to be able to utilise further allocations. And this headroom is there to allow those additional allocations to be made.
But no matter how you spin it, the executive never approved the headroom figure that's going into this bill.
No, I think that's a fair point. The executive were not asked to approve a specific headroom figure that went into the bill that we did write on the estimates, and we have included headroom previously in the estimates on the same basis.
Just for clarity, Joanne, so when the Minister wrote to the other ministers, was it to ask for approval for agreement in the headroom, or was it to note?
Barry, do you want to clarify that?
Well, when he wrote it, he did not write to ask for agreement for headroom. He wrote to the other ministers to ask. First of all, he asked at the time of January monitoring to agree that he would write to other ministers to ask him to bring forward any proposals for additional expenditure. And then when the estimates in the budget bill were had been drafted, he wrote to the other ministers to inform them that he was bringing the bill and the spring supplementary estimates to the Assembly. He didn't ask them to agree to the budget bill or the spring supplementary estimates.
Those, with respect, are two different issues. The first purpose in writing to the executive, while there still was an executive, was to advise them of the headroom issue and to seek approval. Mm-hmm. It was never obtained because the executive ceased to exist. That's quite different from then writing to individual ministers, asking them for bids. No matter how you spin this, there's been no approval for the headroom by the executive.
And I think, I can't argue that point, but I think headroom has been incorporated in estimates previously on this same basis, and I don't think there would have been an expectation of the executive that it would have been asked for approval, because departments are also constrained by their budgetary position, and it's that budgetary position which the executive agrees. So regardless of the amount of headroom which is built in, departments are constrained by the budget position, so the headroom will exceed the allocations that departments ultimately receive.
Why ever write to the executive about headroom?
We don't write to the executive about headroom. We write to them to say we're bringing the budget bill. We haven't written about headroom.
I thought you told us a moment ago that before the executive fell, the minister had written about this very issue.
I think, and Barry will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was to say that he was bringing forward the budget bill and the SSEs, and that the papers they were presented would have included the headroom. It would not have explicitly asked them to agree the headroom.
So you're saying,
Barry corrects me if I'm wrong there.
No, that's correct. To say the SSEs were shared with the executive, and those SSEs contain, as you know, the table that sets out the headroom that is there, but the executive was not asked to agree the headroom.
So you're saying to this committee that it is custom and practice to ask the Assembly to approve headroom running into hundreds of millions of pounds, almost 180 million pounds this year, without ever obtaining executive approval for that?
We only ask for headroom in limited circumstances where we think there's an expectation that due to timing we'll need to make allocations after that. But no, we don't specifically ask for executive approval of that, because it is the budget allocations that the executive would approve, and that is when there is a sitting executive what happens.
How does 180 million compare with previous headrooms?
I wouldn't have the detail of that in front of me, but that's something we can check.
Would I be wrong? Well, if you don't have the details, you can't answer that.
No, I don't have the detail.
Aye.
I could just say there's significantly larger volume of headroom included in the previous estimates. I think there was over £1 billion. We can clarify that, but there was significant amounts this time last year.
We raised considerable concerns about that.
Yeah, we did.
£1 billion. So in one respect, reducing it to 100 odd million is probably an improvement. Okay, Jim, any further questions?
No, that's okay.
Okay. All good. Matthew?
Well, a bit.
Lucy?
Oh, well, Mr. Chair, I interrupted earlier, but I didn't really get with
Oh, go ahead.
questions. unless Keith, you're happy enough. Can I ask our experts here, even if there wasn't a formal budget, but all the political parties reached agreement, is there any reason why you couldn't introduce a number 2 bill anyhow in late spring?
Section 64.
What would stop that?
Section 64
Which would state that it has to
have executive approval.
It's in the Northern Ireland Act.
Well, on the coronavirus regulations, what happened was the Minister of Health wrote around to all of the executive parties, and they agreed to unanimously to drop the regulations. So, to some extent, the executive, in inverted commas, had been consulted.
What the executive has defined.
Well, then why should the same principle apply here?
I think, sorry, I can't really comment on the coronavirus regulations, but I don't think the legislation was so specific. But Mr. Alistair is correct. Section 64 of the Northern Ireland Act is very specific about the executive having to agree a budget.
Just on that, just to understand the legal connection between the budget number 2 bill and the budget bill that's presently coming, there's no legal linkage between this budget and Section 64. Isn't that right?
No. Not this budget bill, no.
Yeah.
Well, the only, sorry, what I just say, this is the budget bill for the 21-22 financial year.
Yeah.
So therefore, this is written to the executive's agreed budget for the 21-22 year, which did have executive agreement and which has since been amended by the monitoring round. So it is connected in that sense, but it's not connected to Section 64 approval for the 22-23 year.
Yes, it's rooted legally in the last year's process.
Yes.
Does that mean...
That's correct.
Does that mean that the vote on account... Would it be possible to increase the vote on account having regard to anticipated extra spend, for example, on health? Is that legally possible?
If you recall, not last year but the year before, whenever the coronavirus pandemic hit, we did do something similar to that, which was we brought a budget number 2 bill, which rather than being written to an agreed executive budget position, was simply to increase the level of the vote on account. So it is theoretically possible, and there is a precedent for doing that. But that was considered a very exceptional situation, and because of the coronavirus pandemic. Also key
and that
was
also met Section 64 rules, didn't it?
I beg your pardon, sorry, Chair.
That met the 64 requirements, Section 64 requirements.
Yes, and it was.
And it was fully agreed by the executive.
It wasn't. It wouldn't have strictly been Section 64 because the key was it wasn't written to an agreed budget position. It was just to increase the vote on account. But in doing that, the Finance Minister did seek the executive's approval to act in this way, and it was simply because the rate of allocations in order to address the coronavirus pandemic was simply so fast that we simply couldn't have got a budget bill through the Assembly in time before it would have actually been out of date.
But hang on, are people not getting a bit confused here? Am I not right in thinking Section 64 prevents a budget but not a budget bill?
The issue is that the budget number 2 bill has to be based on an agreed budget position, because otherwise, departments at this stage don't have an agreed budget position. The only thing they would have would be their baseline position, and without an executive to agree a budget, there's nothing to base a budget number 2 bill on. So it's not that the budget number 2 bill itself needs the executive approval, but it's the position upon which it is based which needs the executive's approval.
What's to stop the Assembly approving a budget bill?
No, the Minister has taken legal advice on this, and Section 64 is quite clear that the budget needs to be agreed by the Executive, and without that agreed budget we have no basis for a budget number 2 bill, because we cannot make allocations to a department without that being agreed by the Executive. So we can't give health additional money without the Executive agreeing that, therefore we couldn't include that additional money in a budget number 2 bill.
But could you include it in a vote on account?
In theory, as Barry says, you could increase the vote on account. Of course, the risk there is that if you increase the vote on account extensively, are you by another means trying to take those allocation decisions in the absence of an executive? Because if health spends additional money through an increased vote on account and an incoming executive decides that it didn't want to give that additional funding to health.
But we know the extra 400 million that's coming in is due to go to health.
Yeah.
And that has already been factored into the budgetary plans for health. So health could,
Put
not
that into the
for
vote.
presupposing what Robin might do.
This is we are still in the middle of taking legal advice on a number of these issues. So we can't give definitive answers on them yet because we are exploring it. You'll appreciate there are a number of very complicated issues at the moment surrounding what can and cannot be done in the absence of an executive. So we can't really give a definitive answer on a lot of those until we have received that legal advice. The Minister has received legal advice that he cannot bring a budget directly to the Assembly and that a budget needs to be agreed by the executive. So,
Joanne,
we have that advice, but there are a number of nuances beyond that which we are still seeking legal advice on.
Okay, Joanne, obviously this is a particularly important issue. As soon as you're in a position for, and obviously we'll not ask for the legal advice because that wouldn't be right of our committee to do so, but what the implications are, can you inform this committee as soon as you have that information and we've worked out what the implications are, so that we as a committee can take a view on that as soon as, because I think that's quite germane to where we're at the moment.
And also, John, could we have in writing the basis of your last comment, which says that we can't pass a budget bill as opposed to a budget? I haven't seen that written down before. And I think obviously...
As you know, we don't share the legal advice, but we can certainly, set out in writing to you that, the advice that we've had and the position that we're taking. And to address the Chair's earlier point, yes, once we have clarity on these issues, we've happily to come back and talk to the committee and to provide them with the paper.
Yeah, because I think we're beginning to sort of lose clarity on precisely where we are on this as well. And I think it would be appropriate that we've at least got clarity of some of these sort of quite large decisions that are coming through. Thank you. Tim, go ahead. Can we see it? Yeah. Joanne, the letter that went out from the Minister asking other ministers when it was about, I think that's the supplementary estimates with reference to the headroom as well. Could we see a copy of that?
Yeah, I'm looking towards Barry there, but yes, certainly we'll provide copies of the letters that issued.
Sorry, just to clarify, the letter wasn't asking the executive about headroom. The letter was asking executive ministers to bring forward additional spending proposals.
Yeah. Well, if we could have a look at that, that would be quite useful. Okay. Thank you, team. Any more? Okay. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Barry, and thank you, Roisin, again. Thank you very much indeed, and look forward to talking to you again fairly soon. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay, team. Next item on the agenda, item number 8, is the accelerated passage for the budget bill of 2022. The Department and Raise have briefed the committee on the spring supplementary estimates, the vote on account and the proposed budget bill for 2022. Under Standing Order 42.2, the committee must decide if there has been appropriate consultation with it on the public expenditure proposals contained in the budget bill. If we are content, the bill gets accelerated passage. If not, then there will be a committee stage and a delay. So we must now deliberate and decide on accelerated passage for the budget bill 2022. If this is agreed, I will write to the Speaker accordingly. Members, do we have any comments? Stand fast our usual concerns about accelerated passage, etc. But we realise of the circumstances within the budget bill. Is there any commentary?
Mr. Chairman, as a veteran of this committee, what would have shocked me more if we'd had a letter from the department saying we're going to do the budget in the normal way. That would be a shock. Now, I've only been around, to say, 27 years and not much longer, as you all know, but that really would be the shock that we're going to do it right. But again, I understand the situation we're in.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, team. Thank you. Therefore, if we are content that there's been appropriate consultation with the committee in respect of the public expenditure covered by the Budget Bill 2022. Therefore, are members content for me to write to the Speaker indicating that accelerated passage should be granted for the Budget Bill 2022? Is this agreed? Agreed. And the further actions, whereas we went through in the discussions with the
department, yes.
Department, if you're content.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Right, moving on to the next item. Is Billy and John available?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Next item is item number 11, oral briefing prescribed fees regulations. The committee will now receive an oral briefing from the department officials on the proposed statute rule, the Building Prescribed Fees Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2022. And we've got Billy and John on Starleaf. Hi Billy. Hi John. Can you hear us?
Hi. Yes.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Okay. Right, team. The following papers are related to the agenda item. The clerk's briefing paper, it's page 544. The SL1 at page 545. And the departmental consultation document at page 593. Billy and John, welcome to the Committee for Finance. We've invited you to the meeting to provide members with an oral briefing on the changes to the prescribed fees regulations. Can I ask who's speaking?
Chair, Billy here. I'll make an opening statement if you're okay with that.
Yeah, okay. Over to you, Billy. Cheers.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. So the department proposes to make a statutory rule, the Building Prescribed Fees Amendment Regulations NI 2022, under the powers set out in the Building Regulations Northern Ireland Order 1979, the primary legislation, to amend the Building Prescribed Fees Regulations Northern Ireland 1997. The purpose of the SR is to provide an uplift to the fees set by Schedules 1 and 2 by a total of 35% in 2 increments, with the first increase to take place on the 1st of April 2022, followed by a second increment on the 1st of April 2023. The 1997 regulations, as amended, set out the prescribed functions and the level of fee that can be charged by a district council in relation to applications for building regulations approval. These regulations have only been amended once since they came out into operation, and that was in 2013. In this time, since 2013, the building regulations have been significantly amended, and general construction costs have more than doubled, with an increase of 112% observed. And in housing, construction costs have seen an increase of approximately 135%. And that information is confirmed in the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors Building Cost Trends. Currently, the fees set by Schedules 1 and 2 of the fees regulations do not fully reflect the cost to councils of processing building control applications. This has resulted in major shortfalls in fees income versus the cost of performing these functions. With the current level of fees, district councils are struggling to resource their building control functions adequately, with ratepayers subsidising the users of this service at this time. The department ran an 8-week public consultation from the 25th of October to the 19th of December last year on the proposals. A summary of the responses in the department's proposed response has been included in the SL1 package provided to the committee. On the consultation, in summary, the overwhelming majority of respondents, 75%, agreed with the proposed fee increases. Those respondents that disagreed were not opposed to the principle of the fees increase. Rather, they either commented that it should be more, or that the increase should reflect the true cost of the work involved.
Billy, just a quick one on the consultation. I mean, obviously the councils were quite happy with it to come back because it was a... Did you get anything back from the construction industry?
John knows the details of who responded more than I do. John could answer that one for you.
Chair, there was 16 responses in total, and none were from industry. There was 10 from district councils or related parties, such as Building Control NI. There was 3 individuals who responded, 2 professional bodies who responded, and 1 political party responded. We did send out at the commencement of the consultation over 350 notifications of the consultation, and also the Department of Finance press office through their social media channels publicised the consultation consultation. I think there was 4 posts or tweets on the social media channels. So yes, we were disappointed not to hear anything from industry, but we certainly contacted them through the notifications, through emails, and through social media.
And nothing?
No.
Okay, thanks. Keep it. Cheers.
Okay. I'll continue, Chair. So in the call, in the consultation, one of the questions was actually a call for evidence for a wider review of the fees regulations, and there was strong support for the principle of full cost recovery for the prescribed functions rather than the work being subsidised by ratepayers. The proposals have not been altered following consultation, and the local Building Regulations Advisory Committee, NIBRAC, has been consulted and have approved the proposals. The Department intends to move forward with a wider review of prescribed fees in the next Assembly mandate. So, Chair, back to you for any questions or observations or views.
Okay. And can you confirm that the sum of all the changes are for house constructions? Is it an increase? Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead. Yeah.
It's mainly domestic works, Chair, so it will be small dwellings. So not all dwellings will be under this. Any dwelling over 250 metres squared does not fall into Schedule 1. It would fall into Schedule 3, which is based on the estimated cost of works. And Schedule 3 is not a fixed cost. As construction costs increase, the costs or the charges attached therein go up as well. So
this is all for buildings under 250 square metres. So 350 to 469 for an individual house, and then for a development of 20 houses, it's from 5,000 to 7,000.
Yeah.
Got that right? Okay. And then multiples thereafter for developments?
Yes.
Okay.
Keith? Yeah, just a question, Billy and Mr. Law, gentleman's name, John. Where does the 34% come from? Or sorry, 35, 17.5 and 17.5. How did you arrive at that?
Billy, I'll take this one. We've been working with Building Control NI's fees working group for a number of years, and in 2020 we started a review of the fees, which included a review of the new methodology to calculate Schedule 1 and 2. This proved to be extremely complex workings. Whenever we adjusted one thing, it actually had other unintended consequences. With the onset of coronavirus and the time that this was taking, the shortfall that councils were experiencing, we felt that we had to move forward with an uplift. The 35% was arrived moving to a full 100% cost recovery. For example, if we were to look at the inspection, the plan fees and the inspection fees for a small domestic dwelling, to carry out that work, it costs the district council in terms of their times over £600, whereas at the minute it was £300 being charged. We see this as an interim step to get to the full cost recovery. So it was through reviewing and seeing what we felt the sort of the market could afford, and the fact that industry haven't raised any considerations or concerns would say that we've got it about right.
I'm looking at a table here, Table 1 on page 586 of our pack, and it gives me total in errors of site inspections, plan check validation. So I presume that rate is 56.62 is a rate across all of those activities. So five, yeah, that'll be about right. So 5 hours, 56 is roughly 283. So you're basing that figure on 56.62?
Yes.
And where does that come from, that rate?
That came through a series of questionnaires looking at the costs to the councils of carrying out the work, the hours that they were taking. There's a quite detailed guidance in how to calculate building control costs that were produced by the Chartered Institute for Public Finance and Accounting. It's used in England and Wales. England and Wales use a slightly different approach to us in Northern Ireland, where local authorities are enabled themselves to set their charges, and this methodology is used to set those charges. And we applied that methodology, and that's where that rate came from.
So ultimately, for councils, am I correct in saying this, not to be using any ratepayers' money, you would need to be uplifting in some of those figures 83 till 136% technically, but you're going to
That's correct.
You're doing, what's that, 35% currently, so it's a stepping stone for now, we'll call it that. That sounds a fairly...
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any others? Sorry, Jim?
Yes. Given the fact that the housing market is extremely buoyant at the moment, indeed, it's on a crest of a wave after the recession, why should the ratepayer be paying any developers' costs? I mean, why should the ratepayer be subsidising any element of property development, given the fact that clearly it's extremely profitable at the moment? Now, if you'd been putting these suggestions to us in 2009, I think there might have been a different reaction. But for some unknown reason, despite the pandemic, housing new starts and sales are at record levels in Northern Ireland. So why did we ever get ourselves into the situation where the ratepayer subsidised any of this?
Chair, before 1982, the prescribed fees regulations were first introduced in 1982. Prior to that, ratepayers subsidised everything. And from back in 1982, the initial charge for the inspection and planning fee for a small dwelling, I think, came to a grand total of £60 compared to the current £300. So we moved from a position where ratepayers were covering everything to the introduction of these fees in 1982. We're basically bound by the 1997 fees regulations. Schedules 1 and Schedule 2 set the fees. If we wish to amend them to take account of the buoyancy, we need to actually complete this full wholesale review, which will not only look at the fees, Chair, but we'll be looking at the various exemptions and prescribed functions. So it's a piece of work. These current regulations have been in place since 1997. There's been, as Billy's mentioned, a large number of uplifts to the building regulations, 2 major uplifts in 2000 and 2012, where regulations were consolidated. These regulations do need attended to, and this is, as another member has indicated, this is a stepping stone to that.
Do we know at the moment how much the ordinary ratepayer is subsidising big property developers by these fees, even with your proposed upgrading of the fees? How much is the ordinary man on the street helping the big property developers at the moment?
Chair, we wouldn't have those figures. That would be very much up to the individual district councils would hold that sort of information. We don't get to see the number of applications or the charges. We only get to set them.
Well, for MOT and firearms licensing, the idea, the principle is to make it self-sustaining, that the person who benefits, I have no objection whatsoever to my MOT cost being what it costs to do it, because the value of my car, which is only £1,000 by the way, will rise significantly once I get my MOT certificate. So why on earth are we not looking at an overall reform where the price to the developer is the actual cost of doing the work? Because this is still a tiny proportion of the overall land acquisition, architects' fees, bricks, mortar, builders, etc. So it will not have any impact on the profits of developers, but it will reduce the burden of the ordinary ratepayer.
Chair, that's exactly what we're hoping to do in the next stage, is move to that 100% cost recovery model.
Great, thanks.
I can tell you're not standing for election again. Any others? Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Billy. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So, members, therefore, are we content? If we're content, therefore, is the committee content with the policy intention of the proposed rule and is therefore content for the department to make the rule? Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So we move swiftly on to correspondence. Correspondence index. Members are asked to note at the index of the 8 received items of correspondence at page 648. First item is Public Sector Transformation Fund staffing. The committee is asked to note at page 651 a departmental response to committee queries regarding NICS staffing levels since the voluntary exit scheme. You remember when we had the evidence and it was given to us, there seemed to be a slight discrepancy between what the interim permanent secretary said and our friend from the department had. As members will recall, the interim and permanent secretary had indicated on 23rd of November last year that NICS staffing levels were returning to the pre-VES levels. It would appear that this is not the case, although they remain in an upward trajectory, with the preference being for vacancies continue to be filled on a permanent basis if possible. It would appear that, as indicated in the NIIO report on capability and capacity, the VES left the NI civil service with gaps in its capability and capacity, and that it delivered a limited reduction in staff numbers and salary costs, which will likely return to pre-VES levels soon. I think we would probably think that I don't think there was any savings made at all, or very little, as we went through. And bearing in mind the loss of capability, experienced staff and the rest of it, I think more than sort of created more problems than any potential savings might have been. The committee may therefore wish to consider the effectiveness of the previous VES and the ability of any future similar schemes to deliver transformational change. It may be that similar proposals will be put forward in support of future public sector transformation schemes. Hopefully they won't, but I think we have had enough evidence in this committee over our 2-year period to realise that particularly Northern Ireland civil service transformation has been a very mixed beast, and I think we should be making sure that any future committee has the opportunity to examine these lessons as they come forward. Is the committee therefore content to note this correspondence? Noted and agreed. Public Sector Transformation Fund achievements. The committee is asked to note at page 656 a response from the Controller and Auditor General to the committee's letter suggesting that the Northern Ireland Audit Office revisits its previous review of the VES. Any comments? Okay. Content to note? Great. Northern Ireland Civil Service Voluntary Exit Scheme. The committee is asked to note at page 657 a response from the Public Accounts Committee to the committee's letter suggesting that the Northern Ireland Audit Office revisits its previous review of the VES. Is the committee content to forward this response to the original correspondence?
Chair, that's a mistake. Is the committee content to note?
Sorry, is the committee content to note? Noted. Great, that's fine. Thank you. Permanent Secretary's appointment. The committee is asked to note at page 658 correspondence from the Minister of Finance giving confirmation that the new Permanent Secretary of the Department of Finance will be Neil Gibson of EY. Start dates have not been provided. I'm presuming, and sort of presumption is quite a dangerous thing to do sometimes in this committee, that he is becoming a full-time civil servant and he is not on secondment from EY or secondment to the Strategic Investment Board or whatever other various combination there is. Could we write to the department just to ascertain whether Neil is in fact coming as a full-time permanent civil servant rather than being on secondment from EY for a particular period of time?
And could we include the as yet unnamed person who may be appointed as the Permanent Secretary of the Civil Service?
Sorry, Jim?
Is this not telling us about 2 Permanent Secretary appointments?
Yes, there's also the Permanent Secretary position. It's
communities, finance, but not agriculture.
Not agriculture, it's still doing that. Yeah. Are we content to write and content to note? Thank you. Agreed. Draft investment strategy for Northern Ireland. You will remember sort of the comments made by, I think it was the Fiscal Council when they were given, was it Fiscal Council? Yeah, it was giving comment in front of us, and they were talking about the sort of the draft investment strategy, and it seemed to be quite strange that the draft investment strategy was going out before there was a programme for government, or indeed even a budget. And I think they were being quite polite, but I think in sort of Northern Ireland parlance, we were very definitely putting the sort of the cart before the horse in this particular one. So, therefore, asked to consider at page 659 correspondence from the Committee of the Executive Office, sinking the Committee's commentary on the draft investment strategy in March 2022. So, is the Committee content to respond to the correspondence indicating that the investment strategy, though welcome, should have preceded the 22-25 draft budget and been used to craft capital expenditure in the latter? And the Committee might also indicate that the investment strategy should also have been linked to a new programme for government, and that it's difficult to scrutinise its overall impact on a strategic financial level without input from the other committees, and there was little time for this in the closing weeks of the mandate. And if we read the strategic investment, or if we read the investment strategy, it does seem to read a bit like the sort of the previous programme for government. It seems to be long in ambition and short in detail. And I think if we were content to write to the Executive Committee in those terms, are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Next item is the domestic sexual abuse strategy. The Committee is asked to note on page 738 notification of an extension of the call for views to Monday the 7th of March 22 in respect of a domestic and sexual abuse strategy led by the Department of Justice and Department of Health, and an equally safe strategy, a strategy to tackle violence against women and girls led by the TEO. Are we content to note this correspondence?
Note.
Noted. Okay. Next item on the agenda, period poverty. The Committee is asked to again consider at page 740 a copy of correspondence between the Committee for Education and the Minister for Finance regarding the period products bill. Is the Committee content to write to the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Education seeking clarity as to which department will have responsibility for delivering on this legislation, what the costs will be, and which department will cover these costs? Now, I know it's something that we all want to see happen, but somebody should have some responsibility for the costs of it, and I think it should be appropriate that at least one ministry is actually detailed off as who's going to provide the funding for this to go forward. Are we content? Agreed. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, 12.9, LPS charitable exemption relief. Declaration of interest here. Apologies for not making it early. I've been in correspondence again with the Reserve Forces Cadet Association in Northern Ireland. The Committee is asked to note at page 744 further correspondence on the charitable rates exemption for the Reserve Forces Cadet Association. The Department indicates that LPS will respond to the correspondent on this matter. There seems to be a difference between what happens in the rest of our nation when defining either charities or organisations which do sort of common good or charitable good as well. And there seems to be a difference between how they're examined in the rest of our nation and in Northern Ireland. And I understand from some sort of sporting clubs as well, there's some similar sort of issues that are beginning to arise themselves. I'm just asking the Committee to note this correspondence, but I think there's quite a bit more of this to go. I think we have actually opened up something quite interesting here if we're going to go forward. Are we agreed?
No.
Great. A competent information request is page 749. Contempt that the competent request is an accurate and complete record of the Committee's information request. Is this agreed? Agreed. Draft forward work programme is page 746. It is suggested that the Committee receive a short additional oral brief next week on the nearly zero energy building guidance which the Department proposes to change. This is pretty extensive, so I think it would be useful if we were at least cognisant of some of the significant changes that are likely to be. Is that agreed? Agreed. The provisional order paper for Wednesday the 2nd of March includes a heavy schedule of debates, including the defamation bill consideration stage in the morning and other important matters in the afternoon. The defamation overruns. This will be a clash with the Finance Committee meeting on the 2nd of March. Can I put my apologies in now, Committee, and I've already informed the Clerk, I'll not be available on the 2nd of March. I will regrettably be in Brussels, but that is my particular thing I have to cover. So therefore, would the Committee wish to consider cancelling its meeting on the 2nd of March, owing to the pressure of plenary business? Because I suspect most of us, if we're not on other things otherwise, will either be speaking in or will be involved in voting, if we are agreed. Great. Okay, thank you. Is the Committee content with the forward work programme as amended? Agreed. Any other business?
Chair, I'd like to ask, would the committee, I'd suggest, write to the Finance Minister seeking some amplification and clarification on his apparent declaration to the House earlier in the week that any additional funding required for the casement project would not require executive approval, which seems difficult to understand in circumstances where there was an allotted amount of money previously approved and now a project that's way over the original anticipated budget, but no indication that the beneficiary is prepared to pay more than the original amount, therefore suggesting the public purse may be called upon. How could that be done without executive approval? I'd like absolute clarity on that.
I think it sort of, and because this is obviously it's an issue of considerable concern for many people, but the other issue is what is the quantum of, I mean, how much is the overrun? And listening to the Minister, who was very quick to come out after the statement about the sub-regional stadia, which wasn't going to go ahead, and saying that casement would go ahead because it was part of the flagship programmes process, but the sub-regional stadia are part of that overall package as well, and that's not going ahead. And most of the sub-regional stadia are already costed within the sort of the envelope of the 35.8 million, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we've got no idea what the cost envelope is of casement. I think there's a question of clarity here. Of is the Minister aware of what the likely cost is going to be? And also, if that is a significant, I mean, if it's what we don't want to do is casement turning out to be sort of an Ulster University, which seems to absorb significant amounts of sort of cash, FTC capital, and whatever happens to be sort of reabridged and moved around, and seems to have grown considerably to well over double its budget. So I think there is a legitimate question we should be asking, particularly from the Department of Finance, as the Finance Committee, about what the overall envelope of sort of expenditure is likely to be.
And how it could not need approval from the Executive.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think we need to check this out, because remember, this is a one identity sports facility, whilst the two that have been funded already, the Avonhill, as I call it, and Windsor Park, of course, are cross-community. And therefore, what we don't know, and this is why it should go to the Executive, is, first of all, as you say, it seems to be getting totally out of control. I heard something like £130 million, which I think clearly maybe is an exaggeration, but that's a horrendous amount of money. But second, so therefore, as it's going way above budget, we need to take executive approval for that additional expenditure. But also, the GAA is a fabulously wealthy organisation. So therefore, where is its major increase in its contribution towards this escalating cost? I mean, why is Croke Park not coming up with double or treble what initially it suggested because of the rising costs? Now, what I'd be worried about if the Executive didn't return, that this would be sneaked in under the wire, as it were. So we would have a single identity facility getting a huge proportion of costs. Meanwhile, the 36 million for the sub-regional programme for IFA clubs, for instance, again cross-community, ranging from Cliftonville to Linfield or whatever, it's been starved of money, and that just doesn't seem fair. So therefore, I think the Executive simply has to approve this additional expenditure.
So sorry, I need to, just 1 second. I just need a declaration of interest here, Alicia. In a previous role, when I worked at Dublin City University, I did quite a lot of sort of funding for the GAA and did a lot of sort of business cases for GAA, and particularly sort of GAA Centre, as I would call it, through Croke Park. Every time they produced something, it was always very professionally done. There was always a considerable outline of costs. There was a detail on impact assessment. There were likely budgetary constraints. There was risk analysis put into it, and everything that I've previously worked with the GAA, it's been a very professional organisation, and actually you were able to see how much it's going to cost, when it's going to be there, what's the risk, where's the likelihood of where it's likely to be. Now, I'm not seeing this about this potential for casement, and that's sort of one of the major concerns I have. And I'm not being anti-GAA in any way about this. I do not want to see we need to have some understanding of the cost envelope of this and why this is being approved. Alicia?
Yeah, just in terms of the GA itself, and I would like to declare an interest as well too. I'm a member of the GA, and I never have been part and parcel of any other organisation that is run so professionally with the GA in itself. And that I know that very often, that whenever people will say other sports, they also then attach to it, will say this level of cross-community. The GA, more than any other sporting organisation here in the north of Ireland, have made tremendous steps over this last number of years to ensure that they provide for the community. And I would know that, and I'm talking about now about the whole of the island of Ireland, that if they ever could repay the GAA for its contribution it has made to community on the island of Ireland, they'd be the richest country in the world in order to do that, because much of what they do provide is done on a voluntary basis in every respect. Now, I can totally understand how people would like to get a handle on the total cost, we'll say, of the likes of the Casement project and so on. But to go back to even, we'll say, the original questioning here, one is actually questioning the Minister's statement to the House on Tuesday. And I think one could go back there and ask for clarification on that, quite simply. And that the Minister, I'm sure, will endorse the position that he presented to the House at that time as well too. And the second question then being, has anyone got a handle on, we'll say, the total cost not there, we'll say, in respect of the development of Casement, which is not a GAA cost in itself, because it is a project, it is another one of our flagship projects within the state, and it is a cost that will be incurred essentially by the state in itself, ably assisted to whatever extent I'm sure that they can do by the GAA, and I have no doubt that they'll step up to the plate in every respect in that as well too. But again, I would like to just emphasise this point, that the GAA is very cross-community and that they have an open door.
Nonsense.
They have an open door at all times to anyone to come along and join as members. And as a person who had taken teams myself, and many of them, and I'm going back a long number of years, I remember the time in places like Castlederg, where it was very cross-community, and that I had plenty of young lads playing on the team with me that could have come from a different religious persuasion entirely. Some of them were forced out, not by members of the GAA, but maybe from their own community, who looked down on them because they were participating in Gaelic games and the likes of it. And that for anyone to imply that that type of sectarianism is accommodated within the GAA is totally erroneous in every respect. And I'd like to nail that lie as well too.
Okay, thank you. Sir Philip? Philip?
Chair, sorry, I'd indicated before my colleague Melissa had spoken. He said what I intended to say. I mean, I should declare an interest as a member of the GAA, but you know, I'm absolutely disgusted at the comments of Jim in terms of trying to sectarianise the GAA. And I mean, I note the point that opened up the discussion. I mean, the Minister, in my view, answered these questions in the Chamber and explained the rationale between the sub-regional stadia and Casement Park in terms of the executive having agreed it. I've no difficulty if the committee wants to ask the same questions again. I'm pretty sure the Minister will give the same answers that explain the situation. But you know, I come in initially just to nail and indicate my disgust at the comments of Jim Wells with regard to the GAA.
I think there's two questions here, I think, for the committee to consider. The first one is obviously with the Minister to ask for clarification on the issue between, he might give the same answer as he gave the last time, but ask for clarification on what is the difference between Casement and sub-regional stadia, because that is it. But I think there's another fundamental question that needs to be asked about the quantum of cost, because the reading, as I did, the Minister's tweets and positions on social media, it seemed to indicate to me that he was willing to sign the cheque regardless of what the size of the overall cost is going to be. And I don't think we as a committee, or indeed anybody who's got responsibility for public finances, should be doing that. I mean, we should
Chairman,
be.
my question is, how could he sign the cheque without executive approval?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. You are actually making a statement here without any basis or evidence of that. And the statement that you're making and now being supported by Mr. Allister is that the Minister has said that he's prepared to sign a cheque irrespective of the cost. Where did you hear that being said? Where did you see that written down as being a statement by the Minister?
Well, the Minister said he didn't need
there, Chair,
executive.
for making that statement.
Through the chair.
You're out of line for making that statement, Chair.
Sorry, I'm not. Sorry.
I can go back to your point earlier on whenever you said that you would like to write to the Minister and ask him once again about the statement that he made in the House on Tuesday. Well and good. You also would like to get a handle on the total cost of, say, of the project. Well and good. But for you, why don't you write to the Minister and ask him, Minister, did you say that you would sign the cheque irrespective of the cost? Because that's what you're alleging.
That's what he's going to do.
And that's not a statement that I've ever seen written anywhere or a statement made by anybody.
Chair, what the Minister did seem to say was that no matter what it cost, it didn't need executive approval.
Correct.
That's the point I'm querying. How could that be if the cost comes in way above that which has already been approved? If it was approved, how could such additional public expenditure be made without executive approval?
And again, I go back, did seem to say.
Oh.
I seem to sort of maybe interpret it very differently from you. But
Well, that is the usefulness of his writing to the Minister for clarification.
well, that's what I say about seeming. I'm using that as an example of the word seem.
We will use it. We will seek clarity. That's what we shall do. We shall seek clarity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other business?
No.
Safe home, Alicia. Okay, everybody. Date and time of next meeting. It's 1400 in here on the 23rd. Thank you. Thank you. Cheers.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is